Hey everybody, welcome to the latest episode of The Rock Experience with Mike Brunn. On this episode, I welcome back the great Desmond Child. We're going to talk all about his new book, Livin on a Prayer, Big Songs, Big Life. In this episode, we really dig deep into some great stories of what it was like for Desmond growing up, as well as working with all of these great musical icons. There's lots of great stories in this one. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this episode. So let's jump in and let's get started. Well, first, Desmond, I want to welcome you to the show, and I want to say congratulations on your book, Livin on a Prayer, Big Songs, Big Life. What made you decide to write a book after all of these years?
Well, it's not, well, it took 7 years, so it's not like all of a sudden.
Yep.
And it took a lifetime to live it. So it's, it was one of those things where, my sons were, in high school and all that when we started. And I thought, well, they're not much interested in me. And I've been kind of like rat, up late, they're asleep, they go to school, then I wake up. I mean, this went on for years where I only got to see them somewhat on weekends. And even though we lived in the same house. So I just thought, well, maybe I should just put down in writing, like my story, so they would get to know me, and, I just got more and more deeper into it. Then I realized that, it was very important for me to really recognize my accomplishments, but also, like all the wrong turns too. Because, and it's sort of as a reckoning, because one tends to rewrite history in one's favor.
True. Very true. Well, I love that you started off by mentioning your kids with the book, because I've read the book, and one of the things that comes through to me is, of course, there's a lot about the songwriting and all of that, but there's also, to me, you dig deep into your family history, your relationships, whether it's with Maria, of course, with Curtis, your kids. Was it important to you to also let people know who Desmond Child, the person, is, not just Desmond Child, the songwriter?
Well, that part was more for my kids.
Okay.
I wanted them to occasionally go back and feel me, and who I was, and, why I did the things I did, and, all that, because
Okay.
I certainly didn't sugarcoat things, I kind of said, this is my chance to finally confess everything. And I did.
Was it harder for you to write a book? I know you said it took 7 years. Is it harder for you to write a book compared to writing a #1 hit song?
Well, a #1 hit song also takes a lifetime to write.
Okay. So would you say the song is easier or harder than the book?
No, of course, writing a song, especially with friends and collaborators, is way much more fun and can be way fast. But like I said, it takes a lifetime to write a fast song.
Right. Well, I love in the book, one of the stories that you share is that when you were younger, you lost a radio promotion contest. And then you say you learned a lot about the music industry, and the quote is, originality and imagination don't always win the day. And I was like, wow, that's surprising. So what do you think was important to your success?
Well, it's two things. One, of course, the hustle, the nonstop, like burning drive to make sure that, I could get my mom out of the ghetto, and, she lived like a queen, and that was really, really important. So in order to accomplish that, the hustle had to be, driving all the time. And that's something it's very hard to let go of also. It's like, I'm still hustling. And, just when my kids sat me down and said, you really need to back off. You need to now put a lot into self-care. And, so we want you around in 10 years when we have kids to meet your grandkids and all that. And it's like, okay, but that's easier said than sung.
It's amazing to me because as I'm reading the book, you mentioned in there turning that you're 70, and I look at you and I think of your history in music, and I'm like, this man's not 70. You don't look a day over 40 to me. So how do you do it?
That took a lifetime.
That's great. I know you say that Paul Stanley taught you how to write stadium anthems, and I love this. You say, there'd be no Desmond Child without Paul Stanley. And as a fan of yours, I find that so hard to believe. And I know the history of how you started with him, but what does Paul Stanley mean? That's such a great quote. What does he mean to you in your career?
Well, first of all, he discovered me, in this little club before our first album came out, and, gave me a chance to write with him. And we came up with I Was Made for Loving You. And that song is like their biggest selling song globally. And for me, it's up there with the big songs I've written. It's like an earner. It's constantly being licensed. So I count on that song, for my livelihood. And, just having the financial, support of a song of that magnitude has allowed me to continue to be creative. And that's the whole thing. I tell my students and, interns that come in from Belmont and all that, it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to be a hobbyist? You love music? Where, in the Christmas tree of life, where are you going to hang your little ornament? Because I'm telling you, not that many people get to be the star on top of the tree.
True. Very true. Well,
it's part of the, like the idea that, gotta dance, gotta sing, gotta write, all, you gotta do it. If you gotta do it, then you have to be willing to accept the consequences of bad luck. I mean, I've come so close to so many things, and then bad luck, gets in the way. And, but that's why the hustle has to be tenfold. So that one thing turns out.
So true. When you talk about bad luck, and I think about when I'm reading the book, I never knew this. You had opportunities to write with Van Halen and Michael Jackson were two that came to mind. And I'm like, wow, I would have loved to hear.
And Mick Jagger.
And Mick Jagger, right. I'd love to have heard what you could have done with those artists. Because, I mean, talk about some of the greatest artists of all time.
I know. I just, the Mick Jagger is the one I suffer the most of embarrassment, because he gave me a chance, and I went up to the penthouse of the Four Seasons Hotel on, Beverly Hills. And I walked in there, and he was on his phone, this and then finally he sat down and he goes, I wanted to write a song that has this hook. I'm gonna buy me a gun and use it. Now, at that time, it was like 6 weeks after Columbine happened. And I said, I was like little Mr. Prim and Proper, like, well, this might not be a good time to put out that message. That ended the session, because there were so many ways I could have spun that. Like, in a fun song, I'm going to buy me a gun and use it on myself because you broke my heart. I didn't think of that.
Right. Okay.
I just thought kids would hear that and go out and buy a gun and use it.
Right.
So that was the dumbest thing I ever suggested.
Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that. Now it's funny because I know you were on my show a few years ago, and the story's in your book as well, where you shared a story where Gene Simmons was looking to keep you away from the studio, right? And now I fast forward to December of 2023. I'm at the Final Kiss show, and there you are at that stage talking about writing with Kiss as a special guest, right? So talk about coming full circle there. So who invited you to Final Kiss show, and how did that happen where it went from Gene keeping you away for you being a guest at the Final Kiss show?
Well, of course, Paul was always my mentor and protector in the Kiss world. So, Paul, put me on the list of people he wanted up there to speak about, you know, our writing relationship or whatever. I mean, there wasn't much time to talk about
Sure.
much, you know. Um, so that's how I got up there. But one thing I did notice is that when Paul goes to sing I Was Made for Loving You, he flies across this, over to the remote stage.
Yep.
And and there he is, on the remote stage as far as possible from the main stage. And I just thought to myself, well, Gene can't even be on the same stage when that song's being sung.
Oh, that's good. He's been outspoken about that song over the years, that's for sure.
But I think it's helped the song, you know,
Yes.
because, controversy always, helps.
Isn't that true?
At the time it hurt my feelings, but, I should have say it more, say it more. Because people go, well, let me hear what this is all about, and then they'd listen to it and then they'd realize they love it.
That's very funny. Well, it's funny. I had Bruce Kulick on my show a couple of weeks ago, and he was wishing he was at the Final Kiss show, but he had said to me he was so thankful that you actually shouted out the song "Who Wants to Be Lonely" during your brief interview. And he's like, it was so cool that Desmond took that opportunity to mention a song that I was on. So I wanted to relay that message to you that, Bruce thought was really appreciative of it. And I happen to love that song as well. So
Who wants to be lonely? I just love that song. It's so cool. And also it's that side of Kiss that, Gene was never, you know, like appreciative of, because it was to him off brand, because he's the ultimate marketeer.
right.
So it's Who Wants to Be Lonely? It's sort of kind of sentimental and also kind of introspective.
Hmm.
When the Kiss brand is balls out, tongue out
Right.
all the time, 24/7. But Paul is a very different kind of person. He's a painter. He writes lyrics. He's an incredible musician. He, incredible showman. I mean, that final show was absolutely majestic and very emotional.
Without a doubt. Now I'll say this. I mean, you're known for your melodic writing and writing with Bon Jovi and Aerosmith, and you always got hooks coming out, all over the place. But to your defense also, I mean, you've written some of the hard rock songs with Kiss, like just as an example, because you mentioned Gene Simmons, songs like I've Had Enough, Under the Gun, right? Do you remember writing those songs? With not as big as Heaven's on Fire, obviously, but hard rocking songs that to me are great, great Desmond Child co-writes.
Well, it was, to me, those were my, stadium anthem lessons,
Hmm.
taught by Professor Paul Stanley.
Okay.
I was just riding on his, coattails, and, kind of, jumping in where I could, because, when he's got something in his heart and his mind, he commands it and he leads it. And I was lucky enough to be in his shadow.
Mm. Now, I love in the book you have a photo of, you say it's the Bad Medicine writing sessions, and it shows you up at the microphone singing, right? So I'm like, wow, that's pretty freaking cool photo. Is that what it was like? I always envisioned you, and whether it's John and Richie or Paul Stanley, whoever you're writing with, sitting with a pad in front of you. Was that what it was like, where you were up at a mic singing songs like that?
Well, I mean, that was probably just goofing off, I'm usually sitting at a keyboard and Richie on guitar, and John is the one that kind of frets and he's would torture himself, on the lyrics and, back and forth. And, we were all contributing, but, we all had our corner of the, what do you call it? The ring, right?
Okay.
And, in that case, I think, we were probably on a break and, we were just goofing around.
Gotcha. Okay. I know you say in your book with John Bon Jovi, the writing motto was "Dare to Suck," which just made me crack up when I read that. Was there any songs you ever, released that you say, you know what, in hindsight, maybe that one wasn't one of my best work? Because when I hear that "Dare to Suck," I'm like, no, your stuff has been great for decades. But talk about that. Was there anything that you ever like, maybe that one shouldn't have been released?
No, I'm like always grateful to have it hit. I don't think that She Bangs is, the height of my songwriting prowess.
Okay.
But I was given the melody already, and I wrote the lyrics, and I ended up, producing the vocal and, mixing the record and all of that, because it was originally a production of Draco, Rosa, and Walter A.
Okay.
And then, there was so much pressure. There were like 250 tracks. There were 4 sets of background vocals, and the label just said, Desmond, you just like sort this out. So I wrote the lyrics, and Ricky came in, and sang them. And, but there was nothing, I couldn't get away from the kind of like drony, linear melody. She banged, she banged, but she moves, looking like a little bunch of sting like a bee, like every girl in history. You see how linear it is?
Okay. Yep.
Talk to me. Even the verses in the same tones. Talk to me.
Well, you sing this and you make me think of that kid that was on American Idol that auditioned.
William
I think
Hung.
William, yes, to She Bangs, and now that's what's going through my mind.
I love that, because when anybody, goofs on my music, I just love it. I mean, there's like this great version of Livin, La Vida Loca that's done by Autumn Kings.
Okay.
It's like a very hard rock band, from Detroit. And they're like, they just like reimagined it and it works. So in a way, it kind of says, well, the song's good. The song is good. The style can be whatever you want to make it.
So true. Now, in the book, you bring up a story how Bon Jovi's management wanted to take your name off of the You Give Love a Bad Name writing credits, and they offered you money to do so. Thankfully, you said no. Would you say that might be one of the smartest moves you ever made in your career, saying no to that?
Well, I would never have done it because I already had a hit with I Was For Loving You. I already had money. I wasn't starving and I couldn't be taken advantage of. But, it kind of like was eye-opening. I never had been offered such a deal, and it was like, you have no respect for me for what I've brought to the table. And, I called John and I said, John, are you kidding? I said, if your manager keeps this up, we won't be able to work together. And to his credit, he went back and told Doc, back off. And we were proceeded to write Livin' on a Prayer.
Right.
So it was the best decision he made too.
That very true. Why do you think there's sometimes that negative impression when bands are using an quote unquote outside writer, whether it's Aerosmith or Kiss or Bon Jovi? Why do you think there's that negative perception by some fans? I don't think so, but some do.
That was created long before by critics, because there's a conceit or an idea. I mean, it's really kind of psychotic. There's the idea that if you're singing a song, you're actually telling the story of your life, like exactly as you've lived it.
Right.
Like it's a conceit, like you're confessing, it's a confessional thing. But, it's like, so are you saying that when an actor says a script, that's not, the person who wrote the script, that's the actor acting out his life, playing that part? I mean, how psychotic is that?
Right.
So, it takes a lot of, it takes a village to come up with a hit song. So
Absolutely.
are you telling me that you have to engineer your record too? Are you telling me you have to be on both sides of the recording glass, like sing and then go back in, listen on big speakers, and then go, oh no, involved.
Right.
It's like, why is writing a song any different? It's like bands, usually spend years coming up with their first hit album, right?
True.
Then their big success comes and they're on the road and their life becomes all about, the bus, the bar, and the bed.
So
Those are
true.
the three scenarios that, rock and roll songs are written about.
Yeah.
But, it's like, it's so the bands now are forced to come up with another hit album. And so then, somebody like me, comes in and my job is to help them tell their story as, as best that they can, but also inspire them to, with their creative imagination, come up with a different scenario.
Right.
Like they might, not have experienced with their creative imagination. But, it's like, just like a producer might tell them to sing up instead of down, I might say maybe the melody should go up instead of down. What's the difference?
Right.
And so that prejudicial, like, oh, well, did he write it? Did he write it? It's like permeated because the critics, anytime anybody got any help writing a song or anything, they like put them down. But, it's like, look at the perfect example is Aerosmith singing I Don't Want to Miss a Thing, solely written by Diane Warren. Oh, but it was for a movie. So they're not really telling their story. They're telling the story of the movie. But guess what? They can't do a show without it.
Right. Agreed. Yep.
And nobody's even thinking about Diane Warren.
Right.
It's him. He brings it to life.
He sells the song.
More than that, I mean, he puts his heart and soul into it, and people get goosebumps, and they relate to it. They look around and they appreciate every moment of life that they're with their loved one. I don't want to miss a thing about you growing up. I don't want to miss a thing about you sleeping and me watching you sleep, or whatever the premise of the song is. It's a very well written song. Diane should have gotten her Oscar on that one.
Agreed. So true. And
That's
you
the one, she wrote it for the movie. She should have gotten her Oscar on that. It's like one long-lasting song. What won instead of her? Probably some kind of, animation theme or something from one of the big movie studios that no one even remembers now.
Right. Well, and you've written a bunch of great songs with Diane yourself over the years. And it just, one of the things as I'm reading the book, there's a quote in there. Again, these are your words, they're not mine. You say you are a control freak in a class of your own. And I see that and I'm like, if that's what you think, how are you able to write with so many artists who've got to have big egos of their own? You write with Diane Warren, a tremendous songwriter in her own right. Now, how do you do that where you mesh with all of these different egos if you say that you're a control freak in a class of your own?
Well, control freak in like so many aspects of my life, like how my business is run, how I, put my homes together with my husband, how are the children, had the best of everything. And I'm always, concerned about their well-being. I'm following them on Life 360. So I know, and it's like, why are they up in the Bronx right now? It's like, what the heck?
Being a parent.
This kid spent the night in Brooklyn. Where? It's like, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things out of my control. But the thing is that when you're with equals, like in a room with equals, like Diane Warren, John Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora, like Joe Perry and Steven Tyler, like Alice Cooper. There's no ego there. There's no controlling the other person, because you have to bring your best and you have to know when to back off and let the other person lead, and let them play out their idea, even if you know you have the better idea in the back of your head, and let them play it out and go, I'm not quite sure about that. I said, well, what about this? Oh, right. But
Right.
I like killed their vibe, then that wouldn't have been good.
Sure.
For them being able to feel like they're expressing themselves. So, yeah, I'm a control freak because, I grew up poor. My mom was like a crazy bohemian big sister type person. The house was always a mess, except for my little corner of my little room where it was neat and clean and perfect. I guess it's they call that OCD, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And I think that, that I don't know, is that a psychosis? But anyway, that has helped me to become a perfectionist in what I do. So, people sometimes are ready to give up on a song, or not give up, but say, okay, it's done. It's like, no, it's not done. Let's go take another look at that second verse,
Right.
because it feels like the energy drops there. Like, it's like we're losing the storyline.
Yep.
And usually everybody's, very happy, after we spend 2 more hours on 2 lines.
Right.
I could make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. Now you mentioned your mom, and throughout the book, you talk about her a lot as well, and how she was a very driven person. And I think at one point she even says to you something like, you're never going to be as good as me as a writer or whatever. Do you feel like as much as she pushed you, that also helped you to success in life?
Yeah, I think, it was one of those things. Well, I'll show you. And, she was very proud of me in the end, but, she was mad at me because I was making noise, and this awful man she was married to, who was an accountant, came home and wanted quiet. And I was just in my room, playing on a little electric piano, not that loud,
Right.
enough to control the sound. But I was singing and this and that. And she burst in and she said, I needed to stop, and by the way, you'll never be as great as me. And it was like, that was hurtful, but maybe motivating. But when I went to receive the induction into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, I was so happy that she was able to attend. And, in my little acceptance speech, I mentioned her, that she was in the audience, and she stood up and everyone, applauded. But then she turned around and looked all around the room, and then everyone went crazy and gave her a standing ovation. So it was like her induction as much as mine, if not more, because she created me. She made me.
Right. Oh man. Now, what I love in the book also is, like I said, you talk about different relationships. And to me, when I was reading the book, it seemed like probably working with Cher was probably one of the tougher relationships that you had to work with. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I didn't really know how to work with her, because, I was at that time, I was in this kind of cult, kind of a mind control cult,
Yep.
where the whole thing was truth talk and, confrontation, and I don't like your energy, and, all these kinds of like things. And I had, made her go up to Woodstock, which was driving distance from where I was, which she wasn't happy about. It was very inconvenient for her, but I made her go up there. So things like that. And then, I think there was, we had, I forget who was playing guitar, maybe Steve Lukather or somebody like that. And, she didn't like the solo. And it was like, I don't know. We just like, may I speak to you outside, please? It's like, you don't say you don't like something. You just say, could we try some other options? Like, I'm teaching her, a person who had been a star, even when I was a little kid,
Sure.
I think I was very hard on her. And so in the end, I don't think that she liked me all that much, but I was a different person then.
Hmm.
And, last year I wrote a song for her. And finally, I got a message back from the person that played her the song that said she liked it. Or
Yeah.
no, I saw the text that I like it. So then I went to the management to try to see if I could, okay, she likes it. Can I produce it? Can we record this? And she was working on this spectacular Christmas album that she was doing. It was like, no. She has to keep herself completely focused on that.
Right.
But I did see some kind of article recently where she says that she has some songs like in her back pocket to make a new record.
Mm.
So I was like, could that be mine?
Right.
Or did she just say she liked it to get me off her back? I don't know. But you know what? She deserves all the success, that she's created for herself. And she deserves for people to give her a break. Can you imagine the amount of people that are asking for something from her? And that's one of the things that makes stars so defensive.
Sure.
The way that people turn them into, these kind of objects of adoration, and then they're just as quick to tear them down.
Yes.
And so then how do they keep their self-esteem intact, or even in tatters, but at least have some self-esteem? And so that's why many stars have turned to drugs and things like that to try to relax or to self-medicate better, because, things are hard. You go and you do a show and it's not full. And it's like, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Am I over? But then you go to the next city and, lines around the block, people can't get in.
Sure.
So, and then all of a sudden you feel better. So now the thermostat of whether you're up or down depends on what other people do.
Yep.
Sales, airplay charts, all of these things. I mean, being a star is a terrible job. Sometimes I think that what a star is not that they shine bright, is they hold up a mirror to us and we shine our light on them. And the more people that are shining their light on them, the brighter they go. And then when those fans start dropping off, that light gets smaller.
Yep.
It's not that they're any different. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So it's holding up a mirror and everybody's projecting all of their hopes and dreams and fantasies and everything on them, and then, but nothing is forever. Nothing.
That is true. Now, do you think then,
except for Dolly Parton and Cher,
that is true.
they will be here at the end of time. When we're all dead, they're going to run into each other on some like barren desert and just shake on it.
And I think Keith Richards might be with us forever as well. Who knows? Like,
right?
Oh, man. Now, so then for yourself as a songwriter, do you think it's for your life and your family and your kids? Do you think it's a better life having been, I'll say, a little bit more behind the scenes where you're not the John Bon Jovi face, you're not the Steven Tyler face, but you still have such a hand in so many incredible songs? Or do you wish, I know you tried a few times to do your own music and be out in the front. Do you wish you had more success as a front person?
Well, I know the sacrifices that they've had to make, and I'm so thin-skinned. I'm still mad at a Stephen Holden article for our second review for our second Desmond Child and Rouge album that came out in 1979, where he said, he didn't like our first album, but then he said he loved, and our second album came out 6 months later. He said, oh, well, the first album was so much better than the second one. Like the first one you didn't like. And then the second one is like, oh, they tore down the paper moon and they went from Technicolor to black and white. And, we literally did on our album cover. But it was like, that's still bugging me. So that's still bugging me. That's like 79. That's like what, 40 years, 50 years?
You mentioned that in the book, and I'm like, how does that review from 1979 still bug him when he's had such tremendous success for decades? But I guess it's just part of who you are as a person.
Well, that's right, because, I want to be the perfect person.
Yeah.
And I was just listening to Barbra Streisand's, like epic book, I've been listening to the audiobook because I listened to it on the plane and stuff like that. And she talks about, criticisms of her, that people called her names and they made fun of how she looked. And she's now, she's soon to be what, 83 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, that stuff still bugs me. That still hurts
Amazing.
me. Still hurts me that they said those things.
Amazing.
And so maybe she used that as fuel to say, well, I'll show you.
Right. Well,
And everybody wanted to look like her.
True. Very
Everybody got that Cleopatra makeup and, the bubble dew and the whole.
Right, yep. But I'm glad that you brought up Barbra Streisand, right? Because I'll admit I'm not the biggest Barbra Streisand fan in the world. However, reading your book, the chapter Barbara Land was probably my favorite chapter in the book. Your excitement, your enthusiasm, you're writing Lady Liberty for her, and just that whole chapter to me just oozed such like excitement from you. So just talk about that whole experience of writing that song and working with her.
Well, Jay Landers, her executive music supervisor, and he's made 32 or 33 albums with her. He asked me to try writing a song for her. And so I decided, well, this time I'm going to solely write it. So I spent a day with him listening to all of her like highlights from her career. From the beginning of her career to her most recent record. And so I started to understand what makes her voice ring out, shine, the vowels. You just start hearing, okay, when she goes for those vowels, her voice really rings out. And so then the melodies have, without fail, these jumps, people who need people, you're right. It's like Lady Liberty, all these kind of like modern, almost like jazz meets classical or Broadway or something, very theatrical. And so when I met her, I told her, you've actually created a genre all your own. And she loved hearing that. And I said, the only problem is you're the only one in the genre. She really loved to hear that.
Right, of course. Oh man.
And so, I wrote this song, Lady Liberty, because I remembered when I was 15 years old, I saw the movies Funny Girl. And there was a scene, maybe 3/4 of the way through the film, it's the turning point of the film, where she gets on this tugboat in the, Hudson, one of those ferry boats in the Hudson. And the ferry boat crosses in front of the Statue of Liberty while she's holding up a bunch of flowers. And at one point they merge. And so they become one figure just for a split second. That stayed with me, when I told her that, and she says, I was with the Statue of Liberty. Which means every time she's ever seen the film, she only looks at herself.
Right, that's so funny.
Not the background.
Oh, that's very funny.
And I said, well, that moment is the thing that turned me gay. And she went, oh my God, everybody says that. Don't rain on my parade, right?
Oh, that's very funny. That is very
So
funny.
the thing is, if you go to her new album, Evergreens, it's the highlights, which Lady Liberty made it on, of her 60-year career. It's the best of. And you'll understand why she's not just a singer, she's an intellect. She's deep musicianship. Her style of singing is totally unique. And she's truly one of the greatest singers of all time. I mean, of that style. I mean, you
Right.
could say, who's the greatest soul singer of all time? Aretha Franklin.
Aretha. Mhm.
There's just no hands down. And then of the modern soul singers, Whitney Houston.
Sure.
That's it. I mean, it's like it's down to like one hand, the
Yep.
greatest singer of all time,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think it's important. When I was younger, we lived in the projects of Liberty City in Miami, and in the back there was like kind of like a big yard, you know, that we shared with all the backs of everybody's houses was there. You know, the front doors were on the other side, but we were always playing on the swing set, and they're all, you know, it was multicolored, like, you know, it was like Latins, you know, Irish, you know, African Americans, Haitians, every kind of kid was playing. But somebody always had a transistor radio.
Sure.
And there was, at that time, there was really only one station we could listen to. Wasn't all this multi,
Mhm.
like channeled
Very
whatever.
true. Yeah.
One station. That one station would be, of course, you know, programmed by probably one person who probably got a lot of great gifts from the record companies. But you would hear Aretha Franklin, and then it would go into the Beatles,
Yep.
then go into the Beach Boys, then it go into Wilson Pickett, then it go into Dionne Warwick,
Yep.
then the Rolling Stones, and then Bob Dylan. And that you heard every style of music in an hour, and you loved all of it because it was the music of our time.
Do you think that's why you're able now to write with artists like Bon Jovi, Kiss, Aerosmith, but then also write for Ricky Martin, write for Katy Perry? You've written for some of the American Idol winners. I think you've even written for Hillary Duff, if I remember correct, right? So I mean, you
Yeah,
really what was that?
Crash World.
Yes, yes. So I remember when my daughter was younger, she had that album. I'm like, Desmond Child's on this album also. Unbelievable. So, you know, but do you think that kind of music background as a kid helped you be able to write all different styles of music like that?
Yes, but there's also a little more to it, which is I was, you know, mentored, of course, by Paul Stanley, but also Bob Crew, who wrote all the big songs with Bob Gaudio for the Four Seasons. He also wrote Lady Marmalade,
Mm-hmm.
which went #1 twice in 20 years apart, you know,
Yep.
with LaBelle and then the Moulin Rouge version.
Sure.
And he got to live to see his song #1 20 years apart. I mean,
It's
twice.
amazing.
Isn't
Right.
that amazing? But you know, he taught me that it's all about the story. What are you trying to say? What are you trying to communicate? And if you're clear on that, the songs write themselves.
Mm-hmm.
When you're meandering around, you know, kind of like improvising over a loop that doesn't change chords, I mean, you get modern music. You know, maybe there'll be a hook or two that's kind of cool, but those songs don't stand the test of time. They're as good as yesterday's bagel.
So true. Is there a current artist that you wish that you could write with and maybe help craft their art a little bit, so to say?
Well, I mean, I think I have things to learn also, you know, from the young stars. Like I would love to work with Sam Smith. I'd love to write with Troye Sivan. I'd love to work with Dua Lipa. I would love to work with Adele.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, you know, those are big sellers, and, you know, they're big sellers for a reason because they're great.
Right.
And they have a great aesthetic. You know, I would have loved to have written with George Michael.
Mm.
I didn't get to, but I did, you know, shower with him at the Korean baths, and
Okay.
invited him to my win or lose Grammy party, which we lost 3 Grammys for Livin La Vida Loca, and he showed up for the party. So he hung out all night, but I could never get back in touch with him.
Right.
You know? And then, you know,
Sadly he passed.
he passed. But, you know, he's somebody that I think I could have been really great friends with, you know.
I could see that. I could totally see that.
And so, you know, there are people, I mean, God, I love Sade. Come on. I would just love to have tea with her.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be in her presence. I mean, she's a goddess to me.
Sure.
So, you know, I think that, you know, I think I have some things that I can bring to the table. And a lot of it has to do with making sure that the song doesn't, jump the tracks and go sideways and then not become a standard because it's just too random.
Sure, sure. I mentioned before the Barbra Streisand chapter is one of my favorite, if not my favorite in the book. Another favorite was a little bit more of a, I guess, a negative experience for you, but the way you wrote the chapter I thought was so great. And that's working with Meatloaf. And I'll just say this without giving away the whole story. You closed the chapter by saying you salute Meatloaf. So you had nothing but good things at the end to say. But that whole Bat Out of Hell 3 experience for you, where he won't promote the album, he acted like it didn't exist. In hindsight, you look back on that. What was that experience like for you to Bat Out of Hell 3?
Um, Everybody told me not to do it.
Hmm.
All the, big stars, I won't say who,
Yep.
said, Desmond, we've been on the road with that guy. Don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
He'll kill you. He'll destroy you. He almost did,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. And it's all in the chapter.
It is.
But I was kind of a pawn in a game that he was playing with Jim Steinman.
Yep.
And I didn't really realize it. And my kids were toddlers and I never saw them. 9 months in the studio. Every song was from 6 to 8 minutes long.
Yep.
He made me record 7 Jim Steinman songs that were free to be recorded because they had been on other people's records. Because Steinman was holding on to his Bat Out of Hell 3 cachet of songs and wouldn't give even one for me to produce. But to be fair, everything that I did of his, I sent him the rough mixes and asked him if he liked them and all that. I never got a chance to tell Meatloaf that part of it. So how could you then shut down a record that has 7 Jim Steinman songs?
Sure.
But the truth is that he felt very guilty making Bat Out of Hell 3 without Jim Steinman. But they were in a tremendous lawsuit, which then they worked out, but then it was already too late. And, he needed the album so he could go tour. But then when he went to go tour, he didn't want to really do that either.
Right.
So he couldn't get behind the record. But if you listen to it, I mean, I talked to his daughter, we had sort of known each other, during those times. She was much younger. And, I told her, listen, get the record and listen to it from beginning to end. He never sounded better. We re-recorded those vocals like 3 or 4 times till, and then he's midway through, he started getting vocal lessons from Eric Vitro, voice coach to the stars. And his voice dramatically improved. So then we had to start all over again.
Yep.
But, I worked very hard to make sure that he sounded fantastic. And we had incredible musicians. I mean, it was like 100 people worked on that record.
Yep.
And, to be honest, because of all this re-record, and also the way he wanted to record at a very expensive studio, not with one engineer, we had to have 2. One was doing sound and the other one was doing the Pro Tools instead of one guy that could do both. He was like very insistent that, I mean, every day was so expensive. And sometimes he didn't show up, And then when we went to mix the record with Greg Collins, he'd make us wait, days before he'd give us his comments, but we couldn't take down the mix because it wasn't all in the box yet. It was like all set up.
Yep.
And he never came to the studio to sit with us and listen to the mixes. We sent them, and then he didn't really object to anything. But we couldn't move on without those approvals. But meanwhile, the studio and the engineers and everything was just sitting there waiting. It was so wasteful.
Right.
And I gave it my all, and he wasn't nice to me. I threw a party for the whole, cast, the crew and everything he showed up, he left early. I had Jennifer Hudson, like I got her on the record. He never even talked to her. I mean, she was getting ready to win an Oscar. And I told her that. became one of the biggest stars. Like she's the one that probably should have done the duet of It's All Coming Back to Me Now.
Wow.
You know,
Yeah.
no, I got to use this lovely girl, Marion Raven from Norway, who was being managed by Meatloaf's manager.
Okay.
But she hadn't broken, like
Sure.
worldwide. And she sang gorgeous and all that. But with Jennifer Hudson, we could have had a hit, a global hit.
Right. No, that
But
makes sense.
all the moves that were made like for the wrong reasons. And, they also made me work with producing background vocals with Todd Rundgren, who never been nice to me, even when I was the coffee boy in the studio where he was making Something Anything in 1971 at Bearsville Town. I was still the coffee boy, very disrespectful. And 9 months, and I got stiffed on my back end, $65,000. And then my name, as per my contract, didn't go on the back of the CD.
Right.
I had to flip through it and find my name ever so small. I don't know why he hated me so much, but I think it was transference of all his guilt of not, working things out with Steinman, who is the person that really deserved to make that record.
So then in hindsight, you said people told you shouldn't do it. Do you wish you didn't do it, or are you still happy that you have it as part of your experiences?
It's 50-50.
Fair enough.
I lost a lot. Plus my own overhead. By the way, I got stiffed on 65 grand. My own overhead, believe it or not, was like 100 grand a month.
Right. Wow.
So 9 months, I invested a lot of my own, time and, without getting, and then because he didn't, by the way, that album was like, when it all came in, it was over $2 million. And, it was like, didn't have to be.
Sure.
I could have done those vocals in my office and we could have worn headphones for nothing.
Right.
So many things could have been done so that even if it did sell, we could actually make a profit.
Right.
That's not why the album was made. It was so he could get out there and promote tour.
Right.
And that happens a lot. People make a lot of sacrifices because they can't get the producer they really want to work with. So they choose someone else because they have the tour coming up and they want to get it. I mean, so many unartistic reasons.
Sure.
For the choices that they make. So, I think of him fondly because just as a fan, I think he's, just was an American treasure. And, it's like Jim died, and then a couple of years later, then he dies.
Yeah.
And if you see that last record they made, it's the picture of the two of them on the cover.
Yep.
And they're like walking into hell and brimstone or something.
Right.
Like facing like Armageddon or something.
Yeah.
And it was very touching, actually, seeing it. So, it did teach me a lot because at one point, Diane Warren dragged me to an Al-Anon meeting. I don't know if you're watching The Bear, right?
Okay.
Have you watched that TV show?
No, I have not.
It's killer. He's a chef and he goes to Al-Anon meetings, whatever.
Okay, I'll check it
Al-Anon
out.
meetings is like the flip side of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, for the family and friends of people who, are difficult, because they either have drug addiction or alcohol problems or just mental illness or just whatever. And so I was like just so desperate, and she took me there and I started learning skills that I didn't have before and learning how to create boundaries. Once I started going to a few, then when I was in the studio, I started using some of those techniques and he backed off. And all of a sudden we were getting along better. but I didn't know any better before then.
Right.
So I
Yes.
guess that was a gift
Right.
that I got from it. And I just, from that moment on, it's like, I don't allow myself to be abused.
Hmm.
You know, I just go, hey, let's time out. Let's figure this out.
Right. Right.
And
Well,
and then, you know, you have to have heart to hearts. And then sometimes it's like, you know, maybe this isn't for me. And then they're like, oh no, please don't leave. You know,
right. And then all of a
I'll
sudden,
behave.
right.
I'll
Right.
behave.
Yep. Yep. Well, that's
So
what I
anyway,
love about the book is that, whether it is like I said, the chapter on Barbra Streisand, this chapter on Meatloaf, the stories about your mom, your dad, your family, your relationship with Curtis, you kind of, you put it all out there. I feel like it's like a really honest, it's the good, it's the bad. It's one of the things I really loved about reading this book is I really feel like, look, I've heard the stories about writing Living on a Prayer. You give love a bad name. Dude looks like a lady. I was made for loving you, right? And have your solo album from '91, which I know in the book you said you were disappointed with. I happen to love the record. So to me, I feel like I knew Desmond Child, and I read the book, and I'm like, I didn't have a clue who Desmond Child was before I read this book. So that to me is a great thing about the book.
thank you for interviewing me and spreading the word. You know, if people go on my Instagram, desmond.child, follow me. There's links to, you know, get the book. And hopefully in another few months, I'll have the audiobook finally done.
Yep.
That was a really hard thing to do, the
And
audiobook.
are you doing the audio book yourself? Your
Yeah,
voice?
it's my voice.
Nice.
Yeah. But
Very
it's
nice.
really, really, it's straining on the voice. You know, I was
Sure.
talking to John Stamos and he said his audiobook was like he'd get laryngitis all the time, like trying to get through it
Hmm.
because you have to put so much energy into everything that you say,
Sure.
not like normal people talking. You have to articulate,
Yes.
articulate.
Right. Right. Oh,
You can't just like fluff it off, you know, you have to like give it all your emotion, everything. Sometimes, you know, like my book wasn't written for to be an audiobook like a script. It was
mhm.
written to be read.
Right.
And so there are a lot of, you know, paragraphs that just unending sentences. And
Mhm.
when you go to say them, it's like you don't even know when to breathe. It
Interesting.
doesn't make sense.
Interesting.
You know, but you know, I'm also working on a documentary of
Oh,
my life story and been interviewing a lot of my collaborators. I've got almost everybody except for a few that I'm
okay.
hoping come in.
When could
But
fans expect to see that then?
probably not to 2025 probably.
Okay. Okay.
But you know, then I'm working on a Broadway musical called Cuba Libre, which is the true story of my family before
Yep.
and after the Cuban Revolution. And that story is in the book, and I've been working on it since 2005.
Wow. Mhm.
You know, I just want to bring up that the Sistine Chapel took 13 years to paint.
Mhm. That's right. Yep.
This has taken 18 years.
Mhm. Okay.
This
Well,
Broadway show, we've had
wow.
8 different directors, and we're still moving forward.
That's
So,
amazing.
you
That
know,
is amazing.
because you know, it's one of the hardest businesses to be in is Broadway.
That's amazing. Well, I'll say this, anything that you've ever worked on was always worth the wait. So I'm sure this will be great. But Desmond, I know I have to ask you this. I noticed in your book, and I wrote it down, it's page 137. You're talking about the song, If You Were a Woman and I Was a Man. And you say, well, I'm going to leave that story for another chapter in my next book. So I have to ask you, is there going to be another book?
Well, I've been working on a book in, you know, bits and pieces, but now that my schedule's opening up with Jody Marr, the great songwriter and producer. She's a professor at Belmont
Okay.
in songwriting, and she's an artist that I discovered. I was a mentor to her, and she went on and discovered Mika and wrote the song Grace Kelly and all of this. And we decided that, I mean, she's in colleges and, you know, in a college, and she says there are no great textbooks on songwriting for that someone could base like a whole like course on.
Hmm.
So we started writing a book on songwriting. So it's not going to have, you know, all the people I slept with and all that.
Right.
It's going to be about, the history of songs and music. And also we're going to take apart maybe 12 of my biggest hits and analyze them and tear them apart. And the book right now is tentatively titled Anatomy of a Hit. And then we also have a section on resources of of things that I think could really be helpful to people that would not only want to become a songwriter, but to appreciate songwriting more and what goes into it.
Right.
So that would be my next book.
So my last question, what do you think, what would Desmond Child in 2024 say to young Johnny Barrett?
Well, I think, my hardest thing, because, I had such a troubled childhood and abandonment by many men, in my life, and I would, want to tell little Johnny Barrett that, he was really loved and had worth, and that, the non-conforming things about me, like being Latino, in 60s, that wasn't being gay. But by the time I was going through puberty, I started feeling other feelings, and being poor, thinking, oh, well, how can somebody poor make it in this world with so many things going against you, and I would want to, all that love I didn't get, I gave to my sons, and I also made sure that I've fixed myself so I could stay in my marriage. We've been together almost 34 years.
Congratulations.
So, that takes sacrifice and patience, and you have to really look at yourself, and be disciplined and choose love, rather than, crappy, egotistic things, that in the end mean nothing. So I would love, I've given all the love that I could possibly give in my heart to my sons, Roman and Nero. I mean, you can see that in our documentary too, the story of Roman and Nero, how much love was put into them. And they were born through surrogacy. And now we have a Pope that's saying surrogacy is against the Lord or something. But at the same time, he's saying, oh, well, now gay couples can be blessed. And it's like, well, which way are you going to have it? And so there are many countries that don't allow surrogacy. And it's like our children were created like with so much love, and so many mystical, beautiful things happened around their birth. And, it's sad that they're now like, making us scapegoats, in order to they probably don't even believe all the stuff that they say they hate.
I'm sure they don't. I'd like to think they don't, but I mean, that's one of the things to me that comes out in the book is just, what great parents you and Curtis have been for your kids, and you compliment Curtis, especially in the early days, making sure that the kids got the proper attention that they deserved while you were busy, writing, etc. And it saddens me to hear that you and people in your community have to go through things like that. But this one of the things I loved reading in the book is just hearing the great family stories also between you, Curtis, and the kids.
Well, thank you for saying so.
Yeah.
And we want to be, examples. We were early pioneers in it. And, we had gay marriage, which was in 2013. Our sons were our best men. We got a lot of rights that we didn't have to protect our children, because we had to spend like 60 grand a year just on estate tax insurance that we didn't have to pay anymore. So we paid that for 10 years. That's $600,000 because it was a punishment to families like ours.
Mm.
Hey, we pay taxes. We
Yeah.
should deserve to be free, and I'm happy to pay them to live in a free country,
Yes.
not in a, totalitarian, regime with some kind of, Handmaid's Tale, uh,
Mhm.
you know, rules or something. It's
Agreed.
like it's like get off of it, people. It's time to live and help live.
Agreed. 100% agreed. And you know what? Throughout this interview and this discussion, you spoke about your admiration for so many people, whether it's your family, the people you work with. You've spoke about how Paul Stanley really, framed you as a songwriter. So I just want to close with one of the things that was in the book. Then that to me, because you've been so complimentary of everybody else, but I love when Paul says, and I never knew the story, that Paul wanted to write and produce Bon Jovi's "Slippery When Wet" album, and Doc McGee said no to him. And Paul says, thankfully, Doc McGee said no to Paul Stanley, because now these are Paul Stanley's words: Des does what I could have never done. So you've been so complimentary of everybody else, but there is the man that you said is responsible for you saying Desmond did what I could have never done.
I don't believe that. Not for a second. You know,
uh,
he can do anything he wants to do. I just hold him in such high esteem. And it was sweet of him to say that, you know.
well, you know what? I think your track record on that album and others speaks for itself. And whether he could or couldn't did do it almost doesn't matter. You did. You did. And for that,
I did it. I made it.
You made it. And for that, Desmond, I just want to say, thank you for the decades of memories. Thank you for, always sticking up for people around the world, your family, the people that you work with. I love when I hear that Paul goes to bat for you, John Bon Jovi going to bat for you. It says who you are as a person. And I just want to say thank you for everything that you've done for the music. The book is great. I highly suggest people go out there, give it a read. Living on a Prayer, Big Songs, Big Life. You will love hearing it. We only scraped the surface of some of the stories in this book today. And Desmond, I just want to say thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much. I'm so appreciative.
Yes, thank you, and be well. And hope you and the family enjoy the Grammys this weekend.
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you, Desmond. All righty, there you have it. I'd like to thank Desmond for joining me, talking all about his new book, Living on a Prayer, Big Stories, Big Life. I highly recommend everybody go check that out. You guys will really enjoy it. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. If you're listening to one of my podcasts, subscribe over there as well. Also, head on over to Facebook and follow my page, The Rock Experience with Mike Brunn, where each and every day we talk about all the rock and roll music that you love. You could also follow me on Instagram and Twitter as well. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you all next time.